Once again, I am Brandon Lawrence, emergency medicine doc in Phoenix, Arizona, and this is Jacked, Just a Couple Dudes podcast. Today, I'm joined by a really good friend of mine, Joe Flamer. He's a brand new father to Michaela. He's a diehard, dedicated, unfortunately, Lakers fan. He's also he also recently and unexpectedly lost his father, who is also another truly amazing man, great mentor, and Joe's really been the rock for his family since then. I met Joe our senior year of high school, and we lived together for 3 years in college, and he's just always, been there for me since. I don't want to do the math on that. That's a long time.
That's a long time.
Anyway, so Joe also donates some of his time to the Junior Achievements in Chicago, where he works with kids and educating them in the financial matters such as credit and budgeting and savings and stock markets, which is, I think, something really cool and really needed because we don't really learn that at all in school. And Joe's helping remedy this void, I think, that's left in our educational system, and that's awesome. So say hi.
Yeah,
Joe.
thanks, man. Hey, thanks for the intro, Brandon. Yeah, we go way back. We've senior year of high school, went to the same college, joined the same fraternity, and it's a long story since. So it's great. I'm glad to be here and appreciate the kind words about me and my family as well.
Yeah. So Joe is one of the few people I talk to on a daily basis. We talk sports, we talk current events, and I can say that you're truly like one of the only people that can kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of see through the bullshit that we get in the news. And it's really fun to talk to you on these sort of things. That when we talk current events, like you offer a unique perspective. I lean towards the Democratic side, and I always have been, and sometimes I find difficulties seeing the other side, and I think you really helped me see, and that I think really over the last 6 months it's been very helpful. So I thought it'd be fun to have you on to talk about some of the current events, the big inflammatory, sensationalized news articles, and try to pick through some of the stuff that's maybe true, maybe that's exaggerated, and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, it's definitely a ton of fun chatting with you about it too. I mean, really the thing that I do and you do as well that's really important is do your homework, right? Before you can get to know things. I hate being wrong personally. I just hate being wrong about things. So what I do is I really try to get the information and look at it from both angles. So when we have these conversations about sports, but current events, topics that a lot of people really don't like to talk about, but we're able to have these conversations because, we're looking at it from a factual point of view. So that's really, really important to me is, okay, what are the facts here? What's the data? And then let's have an open and honest conversation about it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest important thing that you alluded to but didn't say when you talk about having the facts, it's keeping the emotion out. So a lot of times we have these big, titles from these news sources that say one thing, but then you read the article and you're like, well, did it really actually say that? Or is this something they're leading us to think? And that's a really important thing to try to parse out when you're reading up on some of these big current events.
It's really hard. I mean, we're human beings. You're a father of two beautiful girls. I'm a new father. We grew up differently, but similarly, we come from different backgrounds. Everyone comes from different backgrounds. We have implicit biases and emotions, and these companies and a lot of these media companies, they're geniuses in feeding that, right? And like you said, and we're going to see a headline and we're immediately going to agree or disagree with it without even clicking on the headline and doing our due diligence to read through it. And so it's getting past that emotional state and trying your best to look at it from two different angles, right? And there's a bias and an angle for everything. So it's trying to cut through the bullshit, right? That's the number one thing that we try to do.
Yeah, and what's funny is we've been talking about doing something like this for a little bit, and then came out Social Dilemma, right? And that I think kind of kicked our butts into really jumping on and talking about this sort of stuff, because what social media has done is created a barrier to actually getting these factual stuff, because you're part of now an algorithm that just throws the things that you want to see and the things that you agree with, or the things that you vehemently don't agree with. And they put those headlines there, and it's just more clickbait, and it's turns more into confirmation bias, echo chamber, because you're following kind of the same people that agree with you, and then you're in this spiral.
Right. No, it's unbelievable. Couldn't come out at a perfect time. I've been saying this for years. I call it the fart sniffing theory. South Park used to do it all the time. Like, we love the smell of our own farts, right? We love when we're right. It's an innate human nature. Confirmation bias is extremely powerful, and social media preys on this, and that's how they are incentivized, right? They want to keep us on the website as long as possible.
Yep.
Well, if we're reading stuff that we disagree with constantly, you're probably not going to go to that source very often. We're not going to actively choose to, but they prey on this, and Social Dilemma came out right at the perfect time for us to kind of dive deeper on this.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the, I think, most difficult, I guess, current events to talk about is the racial tension, and more specifically Breonna Taylor at this point. I want to kind of dive into this, but I want to start with a caveat. I'm an ER doc. I'm not a political historical expert. I am a registered Democrat, and I usually vote that way. I'm not a supporter of Trump. Most of it's more his kind of behaviors more than anything else. And then Joe, you here on the other hand, you've always really just been kind of totally open, where I've always been just kind of on a little bit more on one side. So I just want to start with that kind of caveat, knowing kind of where my stance is versus where your stance is. Before we dive into this kind of conversation.
Yeah, great point. I am a registered independent. I vote both ways. I typically really just try to see it from a perspective that would try to look at it both ways. We all have our biases, but I don't lean one way or the other. I have a lot of views that I agree with the left, and a lot of views that I agree with the right. And I'm just trying not to try to pigeonhole myself in any way. And I'm a financial professional by trade, so facts is kind of where I bred my butter, and numbers, facts, data. That's kind of where the pure view that I look through things.
How often do you bread your butter?
A couple times a day. It's
all right. So, further caveats here. I was super anti-racist, supporter of Black Lives Matter, but I'm really starting to see that there's this gray area, right? We're not, for lack of a better term, black and white, right? America. I appreciate this grief, the strife that the people of color, have gone through, and I respect their protests. But when we've gotten too far with some of this violence, that's where I start to have pause, and I just find myself sometimes hard to defend some of these actions, whether they were started by the protesters or started by the National Guard or started by another faction. I don't know, but a lot of it has been protesters starting, and that's where I have kind of trouble supporting that. And so I want to dive into Breonna Taylor now, because this is, I think, the hotbed subject right now. We went through George Floyd, that was awful. And now we have Breonna Taylor, which, make no mistake, this was a tragedy, and it was probably preventable, but there's a lot of things that were sensationalized, and that's what I want to kind of dive into right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a very, very difficult situation, because we're human beings, and we all can sympathize and all really, really believe in Black Lives Matter, right? I mean, who wouldn't? We're good people trying to do good by this world. But it's not black and white. It's very, very, very gray. Especially being out here in Chicago, there was a lot of really great protests and movements that were powerful and were great. Really, especially about a half a mile from where we lived. On the other side of the coin, here in Chicago, there has been quite a bit of the other, the dark side of things, and there doesn't need to be a line in the sand. You can be okay to be gray. It's okay to be gray and to feel sympathy and want to help and do what you can, but at the same time be upset that cities are being destroyed and burned, and looting and violence. And I think Breonna Taylor is a big is kind of the breaking point, or at least the point where we can kind of start really dissecting where are we going and how far are we going to go with this.
Right. So the first thing that I want to start with, and I think this is the biggest misnomer that I've seen throughout the whole case, is that the officers were at the wrong house and they were going for the wrong person. Right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's something that you see a lot, is that they weren't even at the right house, right? Why? I can't believe they were doing their job poorly, or whatever the narrative is around that's a huge misnomer. They were not at the wrong house.
Right. So I think where this generated from was that Breonna Taylor's place, and to a lesser extent, Breonna Taylor was a person of interest, but that was not the main person in the case they were looking for. And I'm guessing
Correct.
that's maybe where this generated from, is they were looking for this guy maybe at her place, so they weren't at the right place because he wasn't there. And I think that might be, how this all started. But the warrants show that they were looking for this house, this apartment, with her on the actual documents.
Correct. Yep. That's exactly what the warrant states. And there's a lot of sometimes flimsy reporting about this, about either how involved or how implicit she was,
Mm-hmm.
to determine whether the warrant was exactly for her or for this other person of interest. But definitely they were at the right house.
Right.
That's what the warrant said, for sure.
The idea was that when the guy that she used to be dating, which was the person of interest, and I'm blanking on his name, he theoretically was using her place of residence as a place that he was dropping off packages and picking them up that was potentially drug affiliated. So that was their reasoning for going to that house.
Okay.
All right, we had a little bit of technical difficulties here, so sorry if my argument's a little disjointed on the warrant being in the right place, but about wraps up my thoughts because I can't really remember where I was. But all right, so the second thing that I wanted to dive into was the notion that she was shot in bed, right? So this occurred in the middle of the night. She was originally in bed. It's not entirely true that she was shot in bed because she was shot in the hall, right? I mean, it sucks she was shot.
Right.
All right, but the location, I think, to me makes a difference, because the police were shot at, right? And then you have two people that are up on their feet, and unfortunately, Breonna's the one that got shot. But she wasn't lying in bed as like kind of this like almost helpless victim. I feel like that is like significantly worse to portray it that way. It sucks either way, but I think lying in bed just portrays it as like differently. You know what I mean?
It's a huge narrative difference. And when you hear someone get shot while they're in bed, that's like, oh my God, like what happened? How did that happen?
Yeah.
That is awful. I mean, it's awful that she got shot. I mean, it's an awful, tragic situation, but from a narrative standpoint, it's a huge difference. Like we talked about, the play on your emotions, right? I could just be laying in bed and what if I get shot? What if the cops come to my house accidentally and shoot me in bed, right? That's kind of the emotions that a lot of the false narratives are portraying. She wasn't in bed. She was in the hallway.
Right.
We don't know what she was doing, but
and
she
that
was not
doesn't
in
make
bed.
it like an okay reason she was shot.
No.
So don't get us wrong there. It's more
Yeah.
just like, I feel like to get shot in bed, you had to have had that done on purpose, because you're lying horizontal. To actually take a bullet, you have to be aimed at. It would be super weird to have it randomly strike you 8 times or 6 times, I think.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I think
right. It's just a narrative that's going around that it just takes about 10 minutes of research to realize, oh, she wasn't actually in bed, but
probably significantly less than 10 minutes.
Right. Exactly. Like 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next part, there was like the assertion that the body cam footage was being held, but they didn't wear it. I don't really know why. I don't know if that's standard, but the 3 detectives didn't wear body cam footage, and the body cam footage that is there, that's after the fact, is from the police officers that came to investigate the actual scene.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of fuck ups from that. Don't get me wrong. If you go
Right.
back and actually look at it, like that, the officer that shot Breonna was there and he shouldn't have been, and there was a lot of fuck ups there, but they didn't have body cameras.
Right. There wasn't. Now we could go on for hours about why weren't they wearing them
Right.
and why it should be mandatory for police officers of any kind that they should be wearing them. But yeah, they're not withholding it from us. They just weren't wearing it.
Right. And so I asked, I asked my cousin, who is a detective here in Phoenix, about a couple points. I'm trying to pull up her response here. All right, so I had a few questions for her, and she actually related to another detective that she's friends with as well, and I got kind of the same answers from both of them. And my cousin purposely didn't read his response before giving hers, and it just happened to be very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that was being thrown around, that I was concerned about, there was two things that I was mostly concerned about. One was the notion that there was an EMS rig there that got sent away just prior, to the warrant being, used, right, for entering the home. And the other one was the amount of kind of bullets that were fired in response to the one that came back. And there's no real way for me to look that up. Hey, is there supposed to be an EMS rig? So I asked the detectives who they don't, both of these two. So with the caveat, neither of them do no-knock warrants, but this wasn't a no-knock warrant anyways, which is another narrative that kind of went off the tracks, because they clearly knocked the man that was with Breonna, I think Mr. Walker, his name, didn't hear that it was, the police identifying themselves, but they clearly knocked because it was what woke them up out of bed. But anyways, so I asked her about the EMS thing, and she said, first of all, it's really odd that only 3 officers were there. She said normally there's like 6 or 7. So that's kind of an odd thing that they did anyways, but that's not really any sort of, to me, racially charged anything. So, but she said that it's up to essentially the call beforehand. It's up to them if they need EMS there, and generally they send them away. This isn't like a one-time thing that they sent them away. She says it's the no-knock cases, they're there initially, but if it's a knock case, they don't have to be there. So if you get that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. This isn't like a one-time fuck up. This is something that happens frequently. And this is something that they ran with on this narrative, is that they sent the EMS people away. So it probably, in retrospect, shouldn't have, obviously, but this isn't like a one-time deal. And then the other part that I had asked her, was kind of their response to an officer firing. And so my cousin's very, very sensitive to the racial charge matters and all this stuff. And she really, really hates bad cops. And she's put actually cops in jail before. So she's kind of a badass. So she though backs this up and says, it's so hard to tell from case to case. Like, you walk in, you get shot. Sure, you fire 4 or 5 shots. And if there's 3 of them firing more than that, like that's not really unheard of. One of them, I guess, was firing kind of all over the place, and he's the one that's in trouble for
endangerment. He's the one that got tried. Yeah,
which makes sense. But she said the 30 some odd shots that were fired is definitely not like out of the norm. So that's not something that she raised her eyebrows. And then I think the third point that I wanted to ask her was about this this warrant being issued in the middle of the night. And she said that's absolutely what they normally do, because it's most likely that the people are going to be there. So that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's a tragic situation, but when you break down all of the narratives and deconstruct every single narrative, like you've done with your cousin, it's tragic. It's really tragic, and it's a really difficult situation to have an honest conversation about. But a lot of these narratives, if you just do the research, look at it at the case, you can look at it as what it is. It's a horrible situation.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. It was a preventable tragedy. But to me, this didn't have the George Floyd feel, where this was a guy that literally was getting killed in front of other people that was likely racially charged, given this officer's background.
Right. Yeah, this is exactly. It doesn't have the same feel at all. It's Uh, an innocent woman was killed. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Yeah, but I agree with you. It didn't have that same level of racially charged violence.
Right. And then the last part of this that I was in reading kind of copious amounts of articles on Breonna Taylor was the notion that the officer was shot by friendly fire. And this was actually tweeted originally by Sean King, right? Who's got like 2 million some odd Twitter followers. And
Yeah,
this is where I think me and you really wanted to kind of get into this, is this: you have this guy with a lot of sway on social media putting this narrative out, right? So this officer was shot with a 9mm round, but they only carried the 40 calibers. So you do the math there, they don't have that kind of gun that could have shot him.
right,
And so it's like,
right. And
yeah,
it's unbelievable. And Chris Cuomo is a pretty prominent, I would say, anchor on CNN, raised the same question.
right.
And, that's millions of people are watching that. That gets retweeted in the
Mm-hmm.
echo chamber, and millions of eyeballs are questioning that. It's unequivocal ballistic fact
Right.
that it was not friendly fire. I mean, it's just read the report. It's unequivocal evidence
Right.
that it wasn't.
And like I mentioned earlier, if I was going to choose between watching Fox News and CNN, I'm going to watch CNN. So like, this isn't me bashing Chris Cuomo or me bashing CNN, but that's an irresponsible thing to tweet.
Yeah,
It's just,
it
it
is.
doesn't matter what
Yeah,
side you're on. That's irresponsible.
it
And
is. And
so
yeah,
I think we can kind of discuss here a little bit, since we're talking about Twitter, kind of, what we were talking about a few days ago about fixing this shit.
yeah, no, it's
So
unbelievable.
yeah, so one of the ideas that we were kicking around, it's hard to parse out on Twitter all the bot accounts and the hacking accounts and just the people that are on there as trolls, more or less, right? And so due to that, it's difficult to police Twitter, right? So Twitter, for some reason, had chosen to police Trump, which is fine, but then they didn't really police anyone else, which isn't, right? So we
Right.
discussed kind of ways around doing this, right? And you kind of threw out the very first ones about creating these verified accounts, right?
Yeah, so somehow verifying every individual on a social media platform, treating social media almost like a utility,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you buy a house and you want power, you have to verify you're the homeowner, and you have to verify who you are. Same with if you want internet, same if you want water. Um, treat it like a utility. So we need to be verified individuals, and I think that could be a measure, a way to stop the trolls, right? To stop
Right.
the unverified accounts from going viral and retweeting and causing a lot of what we're seeing.
Right. And then so I had the notion after that, after hearing this idea Joe had, I know there's going to be thousands to millions of people standing up screaming, well, you're censoring our rights to free speech. I'm like, well, this is a privilege to use the system. So why don't we make, lack of a better term, tiers of users, right? So you have, if you're unable to verify yourself, you're an unverified individual on Twitter. Your account can read everything. It can't tweet anything. And then you
Right.
have your
That
verified
was awesome.
individuals that have full access to everything, as long as they've verified who they are. And then you have your businesses that are verified. And then you have your political government kind of agencies as well. That I think that fourth one really is what needs to be super, super fact checked. Um, that's a huge undertaking, but Twitter makes what, hundreds of millions of dollars annually,
Who
right?
knows?
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's worth diving into, because from watching that documentary, this is a slippery, never-ending slope we're on. And I think I love your idea about having the 4 sections of user verification. It's like you have a read only, come join, come read, but you don't have to be verified, but you just can't participate. And then you have the participate, verified user group that can interact with each other, and we know who everyone is. And then the business side of things, right? If you're a business, you can verify yourself. But then I think the most critical component, like you mentioned, was the fourth, is the government, people of public interest section, people that can actually impact change and vote for laws that can be heavily scrutinized, and not just the president, but a congressman from Idaho can be just as scrutinized for saying
Right.
things.
Exactly.
Um,
And then I think
and everyone gets treated the same.
political pundits should be in that group as well. So you don't have Chris Cuomo tweeting this friendly fire narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people that can impact change, they all need to be held accountable and held to the same level that is held to the president. Because even though the president has a lot of followers, a lot more followers, these media corporations have just as much impact by tweeting these things, and we need to hold everyone accountable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be quite interesting seeing some of the
It'd be a
Fox
huge
CNN.
undertaking. Yeah, it would. I think it would be a game changer for these companies, for these social media conglomerates to do that. Will they? I don't know. They're
Tucker Carlson will have a hard time. Did you see that headline?
Yeah.
This is another funny thing that was sensationalized. Was for some reason, I can't remember why, but Tucker Carlson was getting sued for something he said, like a defamation sort of thing, and they actually ruled that he is an editorialist and not a news source. So then the headline was Judge rules Tucker Carlson not a news source, but that's not. That wasn't
I
really.
know.
It wasn't really
it's
what.
It's counterintuitive. It's like, okay, well, you're on Fox News. It's just everything is being blurred. The lines are completely blurred wherever we go.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge to figure out what's actually going on, what's real, what's not.
Right. Yeah. So I think that'd be a pretty interesting idea. So Twitter, jump on this, because we don't need this doom and gloom scenario that was painted by Social Dilemma to affect our children in 10 years.
Right. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Please.
So I think the other really, really big, besides the presidential debate, which we can touch on briefly, the other really big occurrence that's happening right now is the unfilled SCOTUS seat. Ruth Bader Ginsburg obviously passed away very recently and leaves this opening. And here we are. We're already voting for our election, and we're 5 weeks away from having a new president. And now we're in an uproar of, should this seat be filled or should it not? Right. So I actually did a bunch of reading, and the timeline of this is interesting, right? So when you look at 2016, that's the most recent time this has happened. So Scalia passed away in February of 2016. Unfortunately, hours after this death, Mitch McConnell declares that anybody that Obama appoints is going to be null and void, right?
Right.
And so where is the precedence in that? There was none. So if you went all the way back to 19 or 18, like there was like 3 occurrences of this in the last 120 years. So 1896, 1988, and 1991. And each time there was a outgoing president with an opposite majority Senate, right? So Grover Cleveland was the Democratic president, and the Senate was Republican-led, and Rufus Wheeler Peckham was voted in. And then you had in 1991, you had Reagan, or in 88, Reagan nominated Anthony Kennedy, and again in 91, he nominated Clarence Thomas, and the Democratic Senate, allowed it essentially. And these were in the same sort of situation where you're in your last month or 2 months of presidency. And so now you have this 2016 fiasco where Obama had 9 months left.
Right.
Like, that's bizarre. And he cited this Biden rule, McConnell, which isn't a rule. It's something, maybe rather stupid that Biden said, which I think it was in 92 when Bush was on his way out, and Biden essentially said that he thought the next regime should be the one appointing the next seat.
Right.
So fortunately, we got Gorsuch out of this, who's been much more in the middle than we anticipated. But the problem is here, and this is where this took me a long time to kind of figure out my feelings on this, because initially I was totally outraged. 2016, McConnell fucked us and sat on it for 9 months, and he went nuclear, I think was the term. Went nuclear on it and just sat on it and killed it. And now we're 5 weeks before it, and it's the same situation, except it's Republican-led Senate and a Republican president. But to me, it's hypocritical of me to be screaming at Trump for just doing his presidential duty, because it says in the Constitution, nominate it while you're president, right? So in 2016, right, McConnell fucked up. He was an asshole. He shouldn't have done that. But at what point do we stop this tit for tat? Right.
I know it's hard. I told you the other day, it's ugly. It's politics has gotten so ugly. The tit for tat, it's the game, and it's awful. It's ugly. It's nasty.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm with you. It's in the constitutional so let's just talk from the president's side of things. He has every right and should nominate a Supreme Court justice.
Right.
And it's in his constitutional right. It's in the Constitution, and he's president for 4 years, and his term's not up yet. And you just kind of shake your head at what happened in 2016. You're like, what was that?
Yeah, and that's what I think. I think every Democrat out there can be angry. They can be upset. But if you look back, I don't really remember Reagan's presidency, but you got Clinton's where they tried to impeach him for being amoral, but not necessarily bad at his job. And then Bush's presidency then turned into everyone criticizing him for saying dumb things and maybe getting us into a war that shouldn't have been. And then you had Obama that got pretty much criticized for anything he did by the other side. And now you have Trump, who's just outwardly criticized and washed on everything. So it's clearly getting worse and worse each presidency. So yeah. I really kind of feel this lady's qualified, right? The new Amy Coney Barrett. Yeah, so she's qualified. She's got plenty of people on both sides of the aisle saying she's probably a good pick, regardless of what she thinks about Roe v. Wade or Obamacare. At some point we got to, one side has to be the bigger side and say, all right, I'm done with this tit for tat. We need to move on, and we need to move together.
Right. I'm with you. Yeah, exactly. And what happened in 2016 led to what happened with the Kavanaugh hearings, and that was kind of, what, the circus that was.
Yeah. That was
and because of what McConnell pulled in 2016, the Democrats were like, all right, you're going to do that. Well, we're going to do this. And that was a whole circus. And, when's the circus going to stop? So I'm with you. I hope that, look, this is the game, right? It's this is the situation. This is the law. Mm-hmm. And as unfortunate and as upset as one side of the aisle may be, there's nothing. And if we can show some decorum, I think it could go a long way for the future of our Congress.
Yeah, and just because this lady is a constitutionalist and more Republican and a Catholic, that doesn't mean she automatically is going to go repeal this abortion law that everyone is really up in arms about.
Yeah,
there's a better chance that she'd go against it, but it doesn't mean she would, right?
Right, and I don't think that it's an automatic at all. It's not. I don't even think it's in the courts. I may be wrong about this, but I haven't read anywhere that it's up for debate even. Right. There's fears
in the debates,
obviously.
That was the first time I'd heard about that. Was last night.
Yeah, same. And I tried to research it. I couldn't find anything. It's more of a fear, I think, understandably, but they're there to serve everyone, not just they don't have constituents. As we saw with Gorsuch,
Yeah, he's voted
You
with
know,
the Democratic appointees on several issues.
absolutely, absolutely,
So,
and
and that's how they should be. These are the people that really should be non-political and above everything and better than everyone else. This is what these people
exactly
need to be because the president should have been that, and it really hasn't been. So these are the people that need to uphold these.
right.
Hopefully, she's one of them.
Hopefully so. And the Gorsuch thing was a huge talking point back in 2017, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of people outraged by it, but it's turned out for the better.
Yeah,
And I'm hoping that this does as well. I'm hoping that we're not going to drag her family through the mud or do things
yeah, I hope.
like what happened with the Kavanaugh situation. I hope not.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about because it's I always find these people like really fascinating and not necessarily in a good way.
Yeah.
She's an originalist, right? So I guess you can call her a constitutionalist. So you have like
Right.
strict interpretations of the Constitution, and this document's now over 300 years old, or almost 300 years old, written by white slave owners. Say what you want about that, but there wasn't like a group of um, you know ethnic diversity, gender diversity when this was made, right? So like we're entering this we're on this precipice, right, of some really kind of wild crazy decisions with like cyber privacy and like we talked about the social media false news stuff and the advent of AI and I mean it's already invented and
Yeah.
mobilized with all these algorithms and stuff, but I don't really understand how the Constitution guides us in this. These are huge things that are happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It, there's so much that I am with you on. I mean, there's like, this is not black and white anymore. Society is so much different. I understand constitutional rights and the Bill of Rights and First Amendment and, so, going through each one. But I mean, we need to take a look at that. We probably do at some point, right? I think that, I feel like being a constitutionalist is just upholding the law, and hopefully with an eye towards current society. That's my hope. I'm an optimist. I feel like you can interpret the Constitution in a certain way, but hopefully with an eye on the current society. So understand, and that's what I think Gorsuch has shown,
Mhm.
and I'm hoping the same with
Yeah, I don't
Amy
get
Coney
negative
Barrett.
feelings about her. Like I get
I
it,
don't either.
Catholic, Republican, you're scared of Roe v. Wade, but I it could be worse, right?
Yeah, yeah, it could. I think that she's extremely well respected by lots and lots of people.
Yep. And that doesn't come
I
easily
you
in
know
her field.
no, it does not in that field. No, exactly. I mean, people call her the best student they've ever had. I mean, I've read a lot of really really positive things about her and what she does in the community too. Like,
And I truthfully
let's
went into researching her wanting to dislike her.
yeah.
And I mean, there's certain things I don't like, but as a person, she seems fine. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So moving on. One thing I wanted you to I guess, describe. Another headline I've been seeing is that these big companies are using. I mean, you might not even be able to speak in this. So we can edit it out, but using their like PPP loans to reinvest in themselves and the dividends to pay. You speak to that at all, like the legality of it, or do you not know?
Yeah, I tried to dig into this a little bit. Um, it's reinvesting into your own company. It's legal, but incredibly unethical.
Hmm.
So a lot of so not this doesn't apply for a lot of major corporations. So I was looking through the PPP, kind of the handbook or the rules about this. If you have
Mhm.
less than a certain amount of employees, you're able to participate in this. And there is a lot of very, very wealthy, like hedge fund type companies
Right.
that have, um, not been, less than the requisite employee amount that applied, received loans, and then reinvested that back into the company, whether it's dividends for their shareholders, And these hedge fund companies, it's technically not illegal, quote unquote, but incredibly unethical.
And again,
Incredibly.
that's a legal loophole, right? And that's the same
Right.
sort of thing that we're seeing with this Trump tax thing. Like we've known for years about the Trump taxes, and now it's all of a sudden a headline because I guess it's the debate in the election. But like the guy, I don't like Trump, you know this, but this guy donated a quarter of his salary the last couple of years to charities. That's a tax write-off. You know, whatever you want to say about his, what was it, 200K or 700K for hair? What was it?
It's like 90,000.
Or
What was it?
90K.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
But whatever, these are legal loopholes he's using. And again, it's more like, well, this is unethical and probably not super presidential, but and then he kind of threw it at, well, Pelosi didn't wear a mask or something that he said.
Unbelievable.
But yeah, so that's what I just kind of want to hanker back to is like what you said is like this is not illegal, maybe unethical, but again, that's the same sort of thing with these tax loops.
It's the tax situation. It's obviously jarring, right? When you see that number, $750. It's like, what? I paid that much in my. Yeah, it's like it's jarring to anyone, but then you start to understand the kind of businesses that Donald Trump is in. Like, look, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a tax professional, but I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to taxes. But essentially, his type of business that he is in allows for this, especially the real estate mogul type business where you can use these loopholes like depreciation of asset loopholes and things of that nature to deduct over a long period of time. Trump's income is not normal like the income that you or I make, right? It's not, it's different. The money that he makes is different. And the current tax code benefits this type of money that you make. You can offset capital gains, which predominantly billionaires and millionaires make their money off of capital gains, not in ordinary income. Well, you can offset capital gains with losses. It's something that you can do. It's a very practiced tax efficiency act that many wealthy people use, and a lot of people don't understand that that you can offset gains with losses, and you can do it losses forever. There's no law against it, right?
Yeah, I think it was like he took a huge hit, like 10 or 15 years ago, and it's just been like kind of coasting on that, right?
And you can do that. And we can argue for hours about the merits of it, or whether it's right or wrong, but it's in the tax code.
Right.
Unfortunately,
whether it's ethical or not, it's
the way
it
is.
Right.
It's not illegal, and it shouldn't even. I personally don't think it's even worth talking about in these debates or in the news cycle. It's like, well, do you think Donald Trump's the only person doing this?
Like I already mentioned, Jeff Bezos is making, 100 times more than he does and pays even less taxes.
Yeah. it's
I'm not doing a but what about there, but it's just where's the outrage to him? Like,
right. It's how our tax code works. And now he gets hit on other taxes, and billionaires get hit on other taxes. It's just easy for most of Americans to understand federal income taxes. We all pay it, so it's easy to understand, but they get hit on lots of other things in different ways. But that's beyond that's beyond anything that probably we can talk about in an educational way. But ordinary income tax wise, I mean, it makes sense, unfortunately, based on how he makes his money.
Right. So last thing I wanted you to kind of educate me on, because we had this discussion where I was morally outraged by this early on. I think this was like April or May, was the big bailouts of huge businesses and of the stock market of this Federal Reserve.
So,
First describe what the Federal Reserve actually is.
So this is a huge misnomer with most people, and it's understandable because it's kind of confusing. But the Federal Reserve is essentially the U.S. government's central bank. So it's not the same thing as the U.S. Treasury. They're two different entities. They work very close together. So it may seem like they're the same thing, but they're not. So the Federal Reserve is like the U.S. government's bank.
Mm-hmm.
and they're responsible for fiscal policy and interest rate policy. And that trickles down to all of the other banks. There's Federal Reserve banks all over the country. And so like when you bank at Chase or Wells Fargo, they report up through and have to follow the rules set by the Federal Reserve Bank, but the Federal Reserve is the bank to the US government.
So this isn't necessarily a government entity.
It is not a government entity. They're federal, the Fed, but they are not technically a government entity. They are the bank to the government. They set policy fiscally. Their job is to create a healthy and stabilize the U.S. economy.
So then talk about how that is different, that they bailed out Wall Street rather than the government bailing out Wall Street.
So their job is to create a lot of times liquidity in the markets. Without getting too inside baseball with this stuff, basically the Fed, what was happening is the bond markets become very stale. And when bond markets become stale, interest rates can rise over time. And that can lead to a lot of problems, especially during a pandemic. It can lead to a lot of issues. Banks can't loan. There's just a lot that banks can't borrow. It becomes very challenging. And when the credit markets dry up, that leads to a lot of problems. So what happens with the Fed is they go in to create additional liquidity into the bond markets. They buy bonds. That creates the liquidity to keep interest rates at bay. And then what happens to that money is because interest rates are low, inadvertently, and an inadvertent effect of that, not a direct effect, but inadvertent, money goes back into the market because interest rates are low. So if you're someone that's trying to put your money somewhere, you may opt to go to the stock market versus the bond market because bonds are not paying very much. So it's an inadvertent effect. So the Fed's not just say injecting money into the market. They're not doing that. They're doing buying back bonds, but that effect, it's a trickle down effect that the money actually ends up back in the stock market. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
thank you. So it's much different than
it's
saying we're giving $3 billion to the stock market because these are my buddies.
Right. It may seem like that because the market, it's hard to fathom, right? You have all these, especially when we were talking about it, the healthcare industry needed a lot of support. And it's very difficult to just see Fed bails out stock market $300 billion and you're like, oh my God, what is going on? But it's more of a preventative measure to keep the economy stabilized. The net effect of that, there's a lot of net effects. There's a ton of net effects, but one of the net effects is the stock market can be injected with additional capital, but not from the Fed.
Sure. Okay, got it. So last night, there was a bit of a shit show that happened to be on TV, and that was the presidential debate.
Yes.
Is there anything in that whole debacle of this kind of nothingness that you want to hit on?
Well, after 3 bottles of wine, I needed 3 bottles to get through that. I mean, I guess the first thing that I took away is we're all kind of losers. No one's a winner here after that. That was pretty sad, to be honest. But I would say the big takeaway for me is, I watched this debate. I knew what Trump was going to do. We've seen his act for 4 years. We understand what's going to happen. I was curious to see what Joe Biden was going to do. That was really the main thing that I was curious to watch because, Biden's run a very curious campaign thus far. So I've been curious to see tight-lipped, doesn't take questions. It's very interesting. So I wanted to see all right, let's see him on the big stage with this, big bad wolf or whatever you want to call Trump. And I thought Biden showed a pulse. I thought he showed some fight, which I didn't know or think that he may have had. So that was interesting to me. And what was also interesting to me, which I'm not surprised in, is one of Biden's biggest weaknesses is if he he's very good at when he's talking from a script. He's very good. Good talking points, is well prepared. But when he kind of goes off script is when he gets in trouble. Is when he
Especially with
says things.
numbers.
And Trump, especially the numbers, Trump didn't let him go off script. Like like, you know, Biden would say something and then Trump would interrupt him, and you know, he couldn't help himself. He just could not help himself. And I thought that played well for Biden.
Right.
You know, if you're doing like a scorecard, because Trump just can't help himself. He just can't stay out of his own way. And if he
But
did,
he's
I
doing it
think,
too.
well, yeah, I mean,
I had to laugh at that.
I mean, yeah, if he could just, if Donald, which he probably will never be able to do, just help himself by not interrupting and interjecting and saying, you know, the comedy act that he does, I think Biden could have had a little more, some tongue twisters and said some things, but Donald let him off the hook, and Donald shot himself like he always does, right in the foot.
So the things that first of all, so there's a couple myths to dispel here, right? They wanted to do a drug test to see if this older was taking Adderall, which if you've got dementia, Adderall is just going to make things a lot worse. Like
Yeah.
that's not going to help things. The other thing is wearing an earpiece. So the idea, if you're wearing an earpiece, is that they're going to be feeding you what to say. But if you have dementia and you're sitting up there already confused and you have someone talking on one side of you and someone talking in your ear, there's no way you're going to be able to stay on track and repeat everything that's said, especially in these questions that are multi-part. So my concern, like I think most people, was that Biden was heading down the dementia path, and we just didn't know how bad things were because, like you said, things were tight-lipped. He wasn't answering questions, and he was kind of sticking to script. So to me, there was two things I wanted to see out of this debate, because I was between either just not really voting or voting Biden. And that was, you know, does he have his faculties? And there's no way that if you're at least in any sort of advanced dementia, can you answer these multi-part questions, get interrupted every 5 seconds, and still get back on track? There's just no way. Like he seems to have lost a step from 4 years ago, which is normal for a 77-year-old, but I don't think he's on that dementia pathway. The other thing I wanted to see was a plan on just kind of bridging this divisiveness. The only thing that I can say Biden did positively in that was saying that he wouldn't defund the police. But I would have liked to have seen him not say this Antifa thing is just a leftist ideal. Like, this is an organization. Like, I wish he could have said, no, I won't shut down the government. I support police. You know, I don't support completely defunding the police, and I don't support these extremists, right? Like, that's really what he should have said. And Trump on the other side should have said the same thing. So I don't think either of them really took steps towards this kind of unification, what the country needs.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, they both kind of tiptoed these lines, and I just don't get it. I just really don't get why the need to do that. It seems so obvious. Just
you get
take a stance.
Right. You get asked point blank, denounce white supremacy. They say, okay, yeah, I denounce it. These guys suck. Right?
Yeah, like just say it. Like, and Trump you always have to, like, they always have to interpret. It's like, they call it Trump speak. It's like why do you have to always interpret what he says? You know, and he leaves room for interpretation. It's like, just say it, man. Just say it to avoid it, so we can move on and actually talk about some of the issues that we really need to talk about. You know,
right? And so instead, what did he say? Stand back and stand by, or something?
Yeah, something like that. And apparently it was in regard to, you know, something about the police. I don't know.
No,
like,
about the Proud Boys.
You always have to interpret. Yeah, it's something about, like, but he said stand by, like in terms of, you know, hold back, don't do anything, you know. But, like, why do we even have to interpret that a day later? Why do PR spokespeople
we shouldn't have to talk about it?
We shouldn't have to talk about it. It should be a pretty easy. It's a pretty easy question. to answer.
Yeah. My
And
takeaway is it was a shit show. I was pleased that Biden had his faculties and was able to stay on course, but I didn't really learn much.
didn't learn anything. I thought Trump really had some opportunities um, to lay really some interesting points, but he missed. He didn't do it, and Biden, thought a good job speaking to the camera.
I loved that,
Um,
by the way.
you know,
Trump the
yeah, it
entire
was. I
time was
was.
looking
I
at
thought
Biden.
that. Yeah, I thought that was effective. I would Biden. I would like to see some more direct answers. I know we talked about it a little bit last night. He has his planned answers and they're sound, but if the question doesn't mirror, he still kind of went with whatever his sound answer was. I wish he would have answered a lot of some of the direct questions, specifically the one about packing the courts and
Yep.
and some of the other ones. So I mean, we learned nothing. I think the biggest thing came from the Biden side that he, like you mentioned, um, has his faculty to him, and Trump just Trump. Same. it's I wasn't there to watch what he was going to do. We know what he was going to do. He didn't disappoint, or he did disappoint, depending on your point of view. But yeah, it was. I can't believe we have two more of those.
Yeah. But anyway, so on to some good news. I think the biggest news in your life is going to start tonight, other than Michaela, obviously.
Yeah. Let's go. NBA Finals, Game 1.
So
I'm
this has
excited.
been quite the year for the Lakers. Kobe unfortunately passed, and then this pandemic happened, and then you guys have just been kind of all up and down all season, mostly up, and then in the bubble down, and then in the playoffs just dominant. What's going to happen?
Yeah, man, it's been an unreal. I mean, I remember I was in Mexico. It was in May of 2019. My wife Erin and I were doing our wedding out there, and I got a news that they fired Luke Walton. Magic Johnson went on Steve First Take and did this whole I mean, it was a meltdown.
Oof,
I was like,
I forgot
oh
about
my
the Magic
god,
Johnson thing.
it was a meltdown, right? He did this whole deal. It was a disaster. LeBron, we're like, what, I had a groin injury. Is ever going to be the same? It was a disaster. They pull off the Anthony Davis trade. Things start getting better. We start making some decent signings. And then we get stuck in China. We're one of the teams in China during that whole deal, that whole fiasco.
Forgot about that too.
That was an ordeal. And then the season starts off great. And then Kobe, tragically passed away. And that was devastating. Beyond belief to the organization, to the fans. It was just beyond anything. And then this pandemic happens, and right as we were playing the best basketball of the year,
yeah,
peaking, I was like, "This is it.
And
no one's going to
at
beat
the right
us." And
time.
then
There was only 10 games left at that point.
Yeah, 10 games left. They just beat up the Bucks, beat up the Clippers. Things were looking great, and then all of a sudden, then the pandemic happens. And who knows what's going to happen. The league was on, then off, then on, then off. And then they looked terrible in the bubble. And
Awful.
And awful. And then here we are. So I think it's going to be a hard-fought series. I do. I think they're going to earn this one. This is going to be a tough one, but I like the Lakers in 6. I think Miami's a very, very, very formidable opponent, but we match up extremely well with them. And at the end of the day, we have LeBron and they don't.
Yeah, and I've been very bullish on the Lakers. I think I picked them in 5 against Portland. I picked them in 6 against the Nuggets. Who else did you play?
The Rockets.
The Rockets, and I think I picked you in 6 against the Rockets too.
Yeah.
I think you guys. I think there might be a sweep.
I don't know.
This is such a young team.
Yeah.
Their veteran really has never been there, right? Their leader, Butler, he's awesome, but I just think you guys are just gonna just roll through them. I think it's gonna be an awesome series. I think each game will be entertaining, but I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give them this. Coach Spo is one of the best in the league.
Yeah, he's great.
They're well prepared. Their young guys don't play like young guys, which is something to behold. Like they are
Hero.
ready for the moment. Yeah, Hero is very scary, and then Bam is coming into his own to be the superstar. But
That's two of the coolest fucking names
we
in the world,
we
too, by
have
the way.
yeah, they are cool. We have the two horses, and
Yeah.
and as history has shown, when you have the best player in a series, and especially when you have the best two players in a series,
Yep.
it's tough to go against that team. I mean, when you look at it, the only time I can think of it was '04 Pistons, which a lot of people are making the comparison to when they beat the Lakers
But that was a
in '04.
defensive
But
juggernaut.
and the Lakers were coming off 3 championships,
And they had
beat
Karl
up.
Malone and
Karl Malone even was hurt, so like that team was decimated, and
yeah,
Kobe was flying back and forth to Colorado for the trial. I mean, it was a mess.
yeah. But yeah,
We'll see.
yeah, like you said, like you clearly have the 1 and 2 players, and then they probably have 3, 4, 5, and
4, 5, maybe 6. It depends.
but still,
Yeah.
you're gonna the way you guys do your rotations. There's very little time where both LeBron and AD are gonna be on the bench. This is it. This is your
Never.
last handful of games, so they're gonna play all out.
They're never on the there's always one of them on the bench, and the lineups. I thought our coaching staff did a really good job, thoughtfully constructed, who's out there with them when they're out there. They have a good pulse on the team, and Miami presents unique challenges that the Nuggets, Rockets, or Blazers didn't present, but we present challenges that no team in the league presents.
Yeah.
So to them, we can play any style, anytime, anywhere. We go big, we go small. We have Anthony Davis is like I call him the biggest cheat code in the NBA. You can play big, you can play small because of him. He's the biggest cheat code there is in the league. There's no one like him, and we have him. So,
he's like an even more fluid, better shooting like Garnett, right? Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, he has more range than Garnett, more rim protection too. Garnett was as good of a defender as he was, one of the best ever. Anthony Davis can block 5 shots in a game. I mean, he's unlike anything I've ever seen in basketball to guard 1 through 5, but also protect the rim. Like he's like Draymond on defense, but also can get you 5 blocks.
And also 5 inches to 6 inches taller.
Yeah, exactly. And with a 7'5" wingspan.
And it's not even the amount of blocks; he affects way more shots too.
Yep,
so
affects way more shots. So we have him, and
and
LeBron.
I really wish he didn't have Markieff Morris. That's all I got to say.
I'm sorry.
I just don't want him to win a ring, and that's my big pulling for you guys.
I'm sorry. Yeah, he's playing well too, so I'm sorry.
It's the worst. Anyways, any closing thoughts? I usually ask.
Man.
I put you on the spot here. I'll edit it out if you don't. But for listeners, if you have any recommendations, anything, books, shows, movies, a Twitter follow, songs you like.
That's a great question. We just watched. What did we just watch? The Morning Show. That was good.
Yeah.
Started that. That was good. And then also podcasts that I'm listening to. What am I listening to right now? It's all Laker related, so I wouldn't be any help. That's pretty much what I'm listening to.
All right, man. Get back to your family.
Thanks, man, for having me. It was fun.
Of course. Thank you for tuning in to another can't miss episode of Just a Couple Dudes or Jacked Podcast. We're new on Twitter, so please give us a follow at JAKDpod. On Instagram, you can follow us at JAKD_podcast, and we have a new YouTube channel set up at Just a Couple Dudes, and that's couple with a K. We also have a website, jakdpod.com, with a new store set up where you can check out our merch and other fun items that we're going to be putting up. So please give us a follow, check out our website, and tune in for the next podcast that we'll be releasing shortly. Thanks.